Africa's largest economy, Nigeria, celebrates 61 years of independence. And while there's still more than a few challenges, investors can appreciate the huge potential and opportunities that remain to be tapped. But you still need to know how to navigate the waters. The regulatory terrain, some say, can be unpredictable. But with a growing, young, and increasingly skilled workforce and other positive factors, Nigeria is the place to be. But others only have tales of woe. So with us to discuss the ups and downs, opportunities, and threats, we have our special guest, Mr. Kunle Elebute, Senior Partner at KPMG in Nigeria and Chairman, KPMG Africa. He has close to 40 years of professional experience advising clients in the public-private sectors in Nigeria, West Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. You're welcome, sir. Thank you so much for joining us on the Global Business Report. So I want to start with, of course, the Nigerian economy. How did we get here? Why are we still a resource-based economy, and is that such a bad thing?
You know, you've got to go back to understand the strategy we chose to grow our economy post-Civil War. We decided to embark upon what we call the import substitution strategy for growing an economy. And that meant that, in a sense, you had a strong currency to attract raw materials and to produce in-country what you were importing. Some other countries, you know, like in Asia, the Asian tigers chose a different strategy. They decided to have a weak currency and then make their countries export competitive from a global perspective. And you can imagine that they were all the way in the Far East, and yet they were exporters into Western Europe and North America. So distance, when it comes to trade, is not an issue. It's about price, it's about quality, and consistency. Our strategy worked for quite a while, but it was therefore, we were dependent very heavily on a single commodity. Supply the foreign currency for raw materials. And over the years, we've now developed an insatiable appetite for foreign currency without diversifying our sources of foreign currency revenues. So we find ourselves now in a difficult spot because we haven't driven it by exports. We've only driven it just to grow the domestic economy. And each time the oil price crashes, then it affects demand. Of domestic demand. It affects, therefore, the domestic production capacity. And over the years, as other countries are becoming much more export competitive, and it's been cheaper to import stuff into Nigeria than to produce in-country, especially without the adequate infrastructure, especially power. So you're producing 5 yards of cloth in China, and you ship that 5 yards of cloth to Lagos, truck it to Kano, and it gets to the Kano market cheaper than the textile factory in Kano making the same item. Just tells you that, you know, we just missed the boat completely when it comes to global competitiveness.
Thank you for that. Just a quick follow-up. Hindsight is 20/20. Whenever we talk about we compare the Asian tigers, the resource course. But if you want to go back to when we just discovered oil, can the officials at that time be blamed? If we transport ourselves back to 1960 and at that time, or even prior to that, when oil was discovered and all this petrol wealth was flowing in, can anyone be forgiven for not having the foresight to say, hey, look, maybe we need to diversify down the line? No, what do you think?
I don't think you can say so. Yeah. Because the economics at the time, when I was at university, for example, in the late 70s, studying economics, you know, import substitution was a great way to grow your economy. Brazil and Latin America, that was their strategy for growth. Most of the countries in Africa, that's the same strategy for growth. The Asian tigers chose a different trajectory because they came from a different economic history than we did in Africa and Latin America. But however, when it was clear that the strategy wasn't going to operate further beyond, the second-tier foreign exchange market and SAP, that's when we should have done that change at that point in time. And of course, at one point you had the U.S.-Africa, trade pact that allowed African countries to be able to export into Africa, into the U.S. Ethiopia built a number of industrial parks purely on the basis to attract American companies to come and manufacture and export. Most of East Africa also did the same thing as well. So even though we've seen that our strategy hasn't been the optimal one for growth of our economy, each time I guess we try to make that change, the oil price goes back up again.
And then we get distracted.
So, you can imagine when Obasanjo became president, I think oil price was maybe in the early 20s. And it skyrocketed up to over $100 per barrel by the time Jonathan became president. So for an 8 to 10 year period, we saw growth of 7-8%. But it was, instead of that growth being an investment-led growth, it was a consumption-led growth. So as soon as the oil price comes down again, boom, back into the cycle. So I believe that now is the time for us to really sit back and say to ourselves, what we're doing now isn't going to work. Some countries have used an IMF program to change the whole strategy. Egypt, for example, has done so in the last 5 years, and you can see the results in Egypt so far. There's no reason why, even if you don't take an IMF program, we develop our own program. But what does it mean in the short term? It means that there's going to be additional pain in the short term. Because you're going to say to yourself, remove all subsidies. For example, you're going to say to yourself, let the Naira possibly get to a managed float or almost float or floating. And therefore, industries that are dependent purely on the basis of imported raw materials will not be able to be competitive unless those industries double capacity so that they produce in Nigeria, but produce also for the sub-region. So if I were a businessman today and I had capacity to produce for the sub-region and export, I'll do that. In other words, if you are able to generate enough foreign currency from exports for your business today, then that foreign currency will also supply your raw materials. And therefore, you're not at the vagaries of that back and forth of the oil price going up and down. Because, to be honest with you, whatever it is that is in great demand in Nigeria can also be in great demand in the surrounding countries. Smaller they may be, but it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, it's about being export competitive, high quality, consistency, and if you do so, Nike can come and produce shoes in Nigeria for exports anywhere in the world. If you think about what's happening in Asia, they have nothing in Asia. For example, look at Vietnam. Vietnam produces something like $40 billion of smartphones every year. Who for Samsung? Who says Samsung cannot come and set up a plant here and produce phones for Africa? Because we have the size, we have the scale. Okay, you may not have enough adequate power, but even if you put in power into your industry and you do a scale economics approach, your unit cost of that power you're using will be a lot less than if you're a small business. So I think that it's now the time for us to really, really look hard at the way we want to grow the country go forward. Because of course you have challenges of development in other parts of the country. So if parts of the country are behind other parts of the country, you've got to find a way to smoothen out that development. Otherwise, you're going to have the issues we have today, where the difference between the poor and the rich gets bigger and bigger.
Fantastic stuff. We are speaking, of course, with Mr. Kunle Elebute, who is the chairman of KPMG Africa. We're actually going to take a quick break, but when we come back, you touched on SAP, you touched on the IMF, the decisions that Egypt made, and you also touched on short-term pain. When we come back, I want to ask you about whether or not the IMF is unfairly demonized around developing nations, and why it seems that maybe that short-term pain is part of the issue. So we'll take a quick break. Special guest on Nigeria at 61 here. We'll be right back. It's the Global Business Report here on Arise News. Stay tuned.
Before being assembled.
Their shoulders, down. Their two hands now holding.
And there we go, Your Excellency.
All right, it is, of course, Nigeria at 61, Independence Day, October the 1st, and those are live images at Eagle Square in the Federal Capital Territory.
On the ground now, they are opening their guns to see who will do fast.
A round of applause for
this quick
display that was just showcased there
is
being done in 7.2 seconds.
All the guns.
The stripping of the weapon as the platoon commander, Lieutenant Hamza, inspects
and other part of the guns that
the parts have
clearly
been
from
arranged
here
sequentially and properly. It is very integral for the parts to be arranged.
All right, great stuff. We still have our special guest, Mr. Kunle Elebute, chairman of KPMG Africa. So much we're discussing, even off air. Sir, thank you again for taking the time to join us. I know we have so much to get to, but very quickly, again, just to recap for our viewers, as you were giving one of your answers earlier, you talked about the short-term pain of having to take reforms from the IMF. You used Egypt as an example. You talked about SAP during the earlier regimes in Nigeria. Is the IMF unfairly demonized in emerging markets?
I don't want to pass any judgment on that comment, but I think that, at the end of the day, these guys are economists. And all they're trying to do is provide an economic solution to the problem you have. In our case, because a lot of what we require to produce in Nigeria is imported, if you go straight to a free flow of the economy, it's going to skyrocket inflation. And a hyperinflation economy is a difficult one to resolve.
Like
you can see Zimbabwe, for example, now, and in Zambia too, hit that. Yeah. So I won't support that in the short term. What you need to do, though, is that we need to invest very heavily in infrastructure and get the economy moving in a way and manner that would get the productive economy moving. Housing program, for example, such that, you have 9 million Nigerians who every month are doing their pension contributions. Even if half of them can afford to, take a mortgage to own a home, just do the numbers. That will be a 3-4 trillion naira addition to the GDP, and housing is a massive multiplier. in any economy.
Yeah.
Okay, everything, component you need in the house has to produce some way or the other. And most of the raw materials require, whether it's cement, whether it's for roofing sheets, are all local raw materials.
Yeah.
Infrastructure is another big space. And the plan that the government has with CBN, NSI, and AFC to develop InfraCorp, starting with 1 trillion capital.
Yes.
And then appointing asset managers to the point that they can raise an additional 5-6 trillion. And getting private sector asset managers to be able to deploy that capital in infrastructure, whether brownfield or greenfield infrastructure. Can you imagine they put that money into transmission lines so that you can expand transmission to 30,000 megawatts? What would that do for electricity? If they put it into digital highways, so that you actually put fiber throughout the whole country. What does that do to the economy? And that also links back to your knowledge economy challenge.
Yes.
You get a point.
Exactly.
Because you need to have that backbone infrastructure for to digitize the economy and move businesses and even education and everything from being analog to digital, even healthcare to digital.
Right.
I mean, it happened during the pandemic where hospitals were doing
telemedicine.
Telemedicine, absolutely. Because they were forced to.
Right.
You get a point, right? So these things are easy to do, but the biggest investment in that knowledge economy is education, because you need to have people that are who can code, software engineers and data scientists, that kind of stuff. Those are the guys that today in what we call Yabakon Valley in Lagos are the ones who are creating the fintechs and the startups that are raising, capital. I just saw again on the wire that Andela just raised $200 million.
Right.
A valuation of $1.5 billion. So it's become a unicorn tech startup. And can you imagine that? We probably have half a dozen unicorn startups today in Nigeria, just by hard work, but also by highly educated, highly skilled people. Now, if you have schools that are just technology hubs, that are just producing these guys, in the thousands and thousands and thousands, not only will they work for a tech industry in Nigeria, but they can also skills and supply to anybody around the globe. Because you can be anywhere in the world and work for somebody in India or China, and luckily we speak English.
Right.
So they can code easily and they can communicate very easily with the Western world. So I think clearly investing in the technology to grow the knowledge economy that we have today at an even faster rate, plus infrastructure, plus housing, those things, for example, and what we're doing already in agriculture, which we should continue doing, those are things that will drive growth in the economy. Now, we need to get to a growth rate of 7-8% per annum.
Okay.
If you grow the economy by 8% per annum over 10 years, you double your GDP size to over $1 trillion.
Right.
Now, once you do that, over time, the economy will begin to adjust in a way and manner that if you want to float the currency, there will not be as a huge impact as today, for example. Secondly, also, businesses have to say to themselves, Nigeria is a hub. Let's use Nigeria as a hub to produce domestically, but also to export in the sub-region. So if you do those things bit by bit, incrementally, and get to a growth rate that is sustainable and drives activity and employment, then you can begin to say those little IMF snippets that you're talking about, you can begin to put them in. But today, if you do that today,
trouble.
It'll be disaster.
Trouble.
It'll be disaster.
What's the, and thank you for talking about knowledge economy, the main, I guess, difference between a resource-based and knowledge-based economy? What's the big gap there?
The big gap is people.
Right.
Knowledge economy is about people. It's about talent. It's about knowledge. It's about the highly educated, highly skilled people. That's the difference.
And the steps you put forward, that's how you make a transition from resource-based.
Yeah, you have to invest very heavily in education. Whether you keep people in school for a number of years, or you just create tech hubs. And those tech hubs, immediately people that get to a particular age and they know how to code, they begin to learn the vagaries of a knowledge-based economy. And as soon as they have, even if they can afford to, Angela is a good model, for example, they can afford to, and you have to fund them as soon as they finish for the next 2 years, they work for businesses and pay back what they cost them to get the training, then they become freelance.
Fantastic. What about the public school system? There's been so much talk about revamping curriculums.
Sure.
So I can understand the Andela and the training, but what about the public side? So what needs to be?
For me, just drop tech hubs in public schools.
Yeah?
So, yeah.
And that's it?
Yeah, that's it. Throughout the country.
That makes sense.
If you're doing 50 tech hubs per annum, for example, around the country, what will then happen is that even if you have oversupply, even if you have much more supply than we do, then we can export those skills. But the point is that those skills can be doing export work even from Nigeria on your computer. You don't have to physically go to where your client is.
Right.
You can sit here, get an order, do the coding, send it off, you finalize it, you get paid.
Just like that.
Yeah, and you probably pay you through some sort of payment system.
Right.
And it gets into your DOM account and you have your card.
And there you are.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one thing the pandemic has showed us to do.
Right.
You can do business across borders without physically moving from where you are.
Fantastic. You touched on housing, and I want to get to infrastructure. And you also mentioned InfraCorp, the seed capital, 1 trillion. But the infrastructure deficit, I mean, how big is it, and how much more effort is going to be taken, in order to close it and get us where we need to get to?
There are kind of numbers about the deficit. And to be honest with you, I don't think the deficit number is what we should be focused on.
Gotcha.
We should focus on what exactly do we want to achieve. Do we want to achieve 30,000 megawatts of transmission? Let's go ahead and expand TCN. Do we want to put the fiber optic cables and have a digital network for the country? Let's go ahead and do it.
Okay.
Do we want to invest in some more high-speed trains? Let's go ahead and do it. Do we want to invest in key roads? Let's just invest in the infrastructure. Do we want to make our airports world-class? So that by being a world-class, having world-class airports, what does it do? You drive long-haul traffic into the airports, and then those airports become a hub, and then take medium, regional, and short hub traffic into the regions. And by creating hubs, what is Dubai? Dubai is a hub.
Right.
Singapore is a hub. Small countries,
small,
hub.
right.
But the volume of traffic that comes in,
especially from Nigeria,
and you distribute into other parts of the country, creates economic activity. Okay. Even in the UK, if Heathrow is a hub,
right?
And you got it. Heathrow Airport, 75 million passengers per annum. It's a hub, essentially. Who says we can't have? We have hubs already in East Africa. We have a hub in Johannesburg. Lagos is Nigeria. Lagos is the ideal hub again for this region.
Right.
So once you invest in those kind of infrastructure, plus you probably expand your port capacity, and not just the port itself, but the infrastructure behind the port to move the goods out swiftly. So Papa is doing much more volumes, but the volumes are such that the capacity to move those volumes of goods there's no investment in them. Whether it's rail or whatever you want to use. So I believe that investing in those 4 or 5 things I'm talking about, getting the economy to get to 6, 7%, 8% growth per annum is the direction that I need to go. And then doing so consistently over the next 10 years.
Thank you so much for that. I want to get to liberalization of subsidies, right?
Okay.
It's been a very big, we had Lamido Sanusi, former Emir of Kano, a former central bank governor on our morning show. How do we approach the subsidies? Because I think we have a chart here. We're almost at $1 trillion so far this year. What's your take, sir?
That's some subsidy of petrol.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's been a very difficult challenge.
Yes.
And unfortunately, in any economy, everything you want to do, things you want to do, you don't do them entirely on the basis of economics. Sometimes, there are political considerations.
Yep.
There are other kinds of considerations that you consider in making a decision. There are social considerations, for example. I don't believe that the subsidies make sense. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, okay, fine. If you take away the subsidy, and therefore people pay market prices for petrol, and government has more revenue, okay, we have to be able to demonstrate to the people on the street that increased revenue is going to be put in higher quality healthcare,
right?
Higher quality education, and all of that there's a trust equation. Okay, so if I'm a guy on the street or I'm a taxpayer and I'm paying taxes in the Western world, I don't have a problem. Because if the guys who are in government don't spend the money adequately, next election, vote them out. Okay? You can see now in Germany, Angela Merkel's party, after 16 years, her party lost the election.
Right.
So there's a trust equation. Lagos State is a good example where IGR moved from 1 billion naira a month in 1999 to over 30 billion naira a month. And truly, you can probably do more in Lagos than we're doing today.
I'll take a quick break, sir. Quick break, we'll continue the conversation. Stay tuned, we'll be right back on the Global Business Report. All right. Of course, you're back in Abuja. Live images there, Federal Capital Territory. There are the dancers with the Nigerian flag pom-poms, cultural dancers there. Again, it's Nigeria at 61, Independence Day, Eagle Square. Live images there. All right, culture of Nigeria alive and well there at Eagle Square. All right, great conversation. We still have Mr. Kunle Elebute, chairman of KPMG Africa. We're talking about subsidies, sir. Please carry on with where you're touching on how, the whole issue around it.
Yeah, so like I said, if you want to take away subsidies, what do you do with that incremental revenue? You've got to demonstrate that you're going to use that revenue for things that will add value to people's lives. The attempt, under the Abacha regime to create a PTF, for example, was a model. I'm not saying that it was perfect, but it was a model. If you look at countries that have subsidies, especially in the Western world, subsidies still exist today in agriculture, because farmers are susceptible to commodity prices. Commodity prices do well, farmers do well. Commodity prices don't do well, farmers don't do well. And you don't want farmers to pack up their business, because farming is an industry you need, for over a long period of time. Because it's a supply of, it's the beginning of the supply chain.
Right.
For industries and for retail outlets and so on and so forth. So many countries have still subsidize the farming sector, so that the farmers will have more money to put back into farming and continue to grow their output. In fact, and when the output, where the supply is more than demand, they use that to let prices stabilize. Otherwise, if farmers become bankrupt and they can't produce food for the next season, the countries are in trouble. Right. So you've got to say to yourself, what is the impact of a subsidy on the economy and the people on the street? And it's an input-output mechanism, for example. But however, I think the biggest challenge we have with subsidies in Nigeria also is its application. If it's not transparent, and if there's big leakage, as we've had in some years back, with all kinds of investigations and EFCs and so on and so forth, where there's leakage in that subsidy, the best way to shut the leakage down, shut down subsidy. That's the best way. But put in place what is required to be able to. So if I say I want to take away subsidies from petrol, I should put that money directly into roads. Right. And give the best roads in the country, okay, such that transport costs will not skyrocket just because of. But again, it's chicken and egg. Which one do you do first? Right. Take subsidy out today. It takes 2 to 3 years to build roads. Or do you go and finance roads and then take subsidy out and use that money to pay back the financing?
Gotcha. Not easy. Thank you so much for that, sir.
Not that straightforward.
Exactly. I really want to get your take on ease of doing business. It is another big topic in Nigeria. How do we make it easier to do business in Africa's largest economy?
That's a tough one. I think there's been lots of attempts to do so. As you know, we rose in the World Bank ranking in one particular year, and because it was being tracked. And I think that team that was tracking those things, and also working with the Governors Forum to say, look, if you guys do X, Y, Z, you're likely to see more business in your environment. So it's almost like it's almost like if you do this right, the benefits will show up in effect. So I think we should continue what we're doing in that respect. But I think there are also institutions that also need to be much more business friendly. Customs, for example, you get a point. And many countries now don't use customs just for point of view assessing duty. They use customs to assess the volume of trade. And for example, I think it's Indonesia also, when they see the imports of a particular importer into their country, they go to that importer and say, look, you know what? We saw you did 1 million tons of this thing last year. If you want to expand this business, why don't you go myself a plant in our country and produce 2 or 3 million tons? You make more money than just importing. So they used to use the data to be able to attract investment. Use that data to plan how government policy should be amended to attract investment. So you have to look at all the various levers that you want to do. If for example, we want to create a massive housing industry, for example, what are the levers to make it easy to be in that industry? If I want to do a massive auto industry, what are the levers? I'll give an example, auto industry. The big car manufacturers will say to you that, look, they won't come to Nigeria to produce cars unless there's a consumer finance industry. Right. Because there's nowhere in the world where we produce cars and people buy cars with cash.
Right, exactly. Right. Exactly.
US, Germany, Japan, anywhere in the Western world. Right. They produce cars and there's financing. You pay the financing over 4 or 5 years. So what is your consumer finance industry? So go create a kind of consumer finance industry. Make it work for the banks to do so. Then the big guys will come and produce cars. Now, but all the components they use to produce cars, can they make them locally? No. They got to import some components. Right. But is there a scheme whereby over the 5-year period, they bring local manufacturers in Nigeria to manufacture those components locally? So when Ford announced a $1 billion additional investment to the plants in South Africa.
South Africa, yes.
12 component companies in the US are going to move to South Africa to support that additional investment. Wow. So that's the point. So the point therefore is that, if you want to do the right things in terms of ease of doing business, it's a mindset. And it has to be targeted and it has to be strategic as to exactly where you want that business growth to happen. for the economy.
Fantastic. So we only have a minute. I wish we could keep you for longer. Just a minute to go. Poverty in the informal sector. Can you? We've got the poverty capital of the world. I wanted to quickly get your take on that.
Well, I won't kind of agree with you on that term of poverty capital.
Yeah. The numbers. Those are the numbers. Yeah.
So they say.
Yeah.
But for me, the biggest way of eradicating poverty is education.
Gotcha.
It's education. And the reason why many parts of the country have got to the level they are is that the education that was invested in those sectors, in those parts of the country 30, 40, 50 years ago is what we're seeing the outcome today. Now, even though the system of education today is not as level as when I go to school, there are many people who can afford it, go overseas.
Yeah.
But there's no reason why you can't bring those people back
home.
Or you can make the investments in the sector so that the next generation don't have to go abroad, but to have education here.
Mr. Kunle Elebute, Chairman KPMG Africa, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem.
Really a pleasure having you. And we'll have to have you back, sir.